As you may know, October is Art Month here in Spokane, and we've worked hard to bring great literary events to our community this month. So please pick up a newsletter before you head out tonight, and you'll see listings for Washington State Poet Laureate Elizabeth Austin and debut authors Ken Zupin and many more. And so we hope that we'll see your faces here again later this month. But tonight's reading is very special to us. We have Spokane native Sean Smith. Sean Smith is an award-winning conservationist whose work has been seen on CNN and NPR and in the New York Times and National Geographic. As a former park ranger who worked at Yellowstone, the Cascades, Glacier, and with the Forest Service at Mount St. Helens, Smith is exceptionally qualified to write political thrillers set in national parks. His first thriller, Unleashing Colter's Hell, was voted a must-buy by Ranger magazine. Please join me in a warm welcome for Sean Smith.
Well, good evening. Thanks for coming out. I want to thank Jess and Aunties for having me here tonight. I really do appreciate it, and I also want to say how wonderful it is still to have independent bookstores that can bring in small authors like myself to do these types of events, because it really is. I was just speaking to some of you about this, that writing books, at least for me, is the easy part. It's selling books that is hard. That really is difficult, and the more venues we have to get our work out, meet with our readers, the better. So I really do appreciate it. The more small-time authors you can invite, the better. So I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I know the Cougars are playing tonight, so we'll try and get this done as quickly as possible. But I do appreciate you coming out. And then I want to thank my parents for inviting all of their friends for coming out tonight as well. So I really do appreciate that also. So what I was thinking we'd do tonight is that I would take 15 to 20 minutes or so, kind of talk about how I got into writing thrillers, and then talk a little bit about why I set them in national parks, and my main character being a park ranger, what led to that, what I think my next books will be about, and then I want to open it up to questions, because that's really where I have more fun, is talking about what you're thinking about, and what you want to know more about. I'm happy to do that. So. Without any further ado, I'll just start off with, so why thrillers? As Jess said, my name is Sean Smith, and so you could kind of say that thrillers are in my DNA. For those that don't know it, I was named after Sean Connery. My dad had seen Dr. No a few weeks before I was born and said, that's a great name that I think we should give to Sean. So, and it's just by kind of happenstance that I have enjoyed James Bond thrillers. I've grown up watching them my entire life. And I always thought, you know, that's an exciting life. It would be great to be a secret agent and do those amazing things and go out and stop evil. And so I have always been drawn to those types of stories. I've read a lot of Tom Clancy. I read Dan Brown's books. I really enjoyed the Indiana Jones adventures, things like that. There's something that draws me about a hero that is set out to confront a threat, a evil that must be stopped. Unlike a mystery where the hero is supposed to solve a crime, the hero in thrillers is supposed to go out and stop this great tragedy. And so that's what these books are set in. This is the story that this is about. You know who the bad person is in these two novels. It's laid out pretty quickly, but the story is about whether our hero in this book, called Grayson Cole, can actually stop the threat that's coming. So that's kind of what I grew up with. I grew up liking Dan Brown's books. I grew up liking Indiana Jones and James Bond thrillers. So I've been drawn to them. Well, later, I got the honor of being a park ranger. And I had seen a couple of these James Bond movies, and I've had the pleasure of actually going to some of the places where they're set. Things like I've been to Cologne, I've been to Paris, I've been to the Bahamas. But then it occurred to me that not everyone has been to these places. And wouldn't it be great to have a series of thrillers set in places here in the United States that most Americans have been to? And it occurred to me national parks are some of the most exotic locales in the world. People, when I was a park ranger, come from everywhere to see our national parks. And I thought, these would make great settings for a thriller. I wish somebody would write those stories. I'd love to see those. When I was at Yellowstone, though, what had not happened yet is I hadn't got the germination of a story idea. What would be the threat? Why would anyone set a thriller in Yellowstone? I mean, I can understand why you go to Paris or Berlin or New York. There's a lot of people there. There's obviously some type of threat. You've got to have the hero defending something. But what could possibly be the threat that would be in a national park? Yes, you have a few thousand people, maybe some bison, a couple bears, but for the most part, you could do something out there and most people wouldn't even notice. Well, when I was in Yellowstone, for those of you who don't know, Yellowstone is the world's largest supervolcano. And I got to lead hikes at this part of the park called the West Thumb Geyser Basin. I don't know if anyone has been to West Thumb. It's it's in the middle of the park in a little less known area, but it's a smaller geyser basin. And what's great about that is that when I was leading hikes, it's a great spot that you can really illustrate how precarious we are on this planet. So you would talk to people and you'd see these thermal features. You got geysers going off, you got hot pools, and you talk about that there is a plume of molten rock just 3 miles below our feet that is feeding these geysers. 3 miles. I mean, that doesn't seem like a, it seems like a great distance, but in average, that molten material is usually 40 to 60 miles below our feet. Safely capped. Well, at Yellowstone, it's found weak spots, and it's worked its way up to the surface to just this paper-thin area of just crust that's over the top of it. And again, I could see people weren't really getting it, and at this West Thumb Geyser Basin, you're going to have to just envision it. There's this Yellowstone Lake, which is the world's largest high alpine lake, and there's this little tiny kind of bay that you walk around. It's one section of Yellowstone Lake. Well, it was a caldera that erupted, and it's probably 10 miles across. But if I were to point and go, see this shoreline we're standing on? See that other shoreline where you can see actually people and cars? That's 3 miles away. That is all that stands between us and the molten material below us. Yellowstone is a supervolcano that erupts about every 6,000 years, and I'm going to read a little bit from my book. There's 600,000 years. And we're going to talk a little bit about it in the book. But then I was thinking, one day I was leading a hike, and I'm like, I wonder what would happen if this volcano went off. And I wonder what would happen if someone could make this volcano go off. And who would want to do that? And how would they do that? And that was kind of the genesis for my story, Unleashing Colter's Hell. It basically was an idea that, is it possible? How would they do it? And if they were to have an eruption, what type of impact would it have on the country, and who would be responsible for stopping that? So the next several years, I just spent a lot of research looking into how often the volcano goes off, what are the impacts of that, how could you possibly get the volcano to erupt. My wife actually was like, are you making it possible for somebody to do this in your release this time? I'm like, you know what, basically it's just about any thriller I guess you could conceive, but I made a lot of stuff up in this book. But I did also, though, want my book to be plausible. I wanted the things to be possible, within the realm of possibilities. A lot of things would have to happen in order for this to take place, but it's not impossible for these events to happen either. And I also, in these books, wanted people to know how difficult the job of a national park ranger really is, what they're required to do. So it seemed like I had the perfect setting, I had the perfect idea, but then I have a park ranger who's going to be the hero of this book, and is that person up to James Bond or Indiana Jones? And one day I was watching, as it is, another James Bond movie. And it was going through, and James was rappelling off a cliff. Next scene, he's flying an airplane, he's shooting his rifle and whatnot, and I was just thinking, I've done all those things. I've rappelled off cliffs, I've flown planes, I went to the law enforcement academy and shot a gun. I'm like, park rangers on a daily basis are required and expected to do a whole host of things. So I'm like, it's conceivable that you could have a park ranger confronted with this type of threat that you see in a typical James Bond thriller. And I'm like, all right. Well, I kept waiting for someone to write that thriller, and it never happened. I was going through kind of a job transition, and I got a life coach And he basically said, well, why don't you write this book? And so we kind of set out. I'd never written a book. In fact, writing for me, at least the technical aspects of it, is very difficult. I have a slight learning disability, so it's spelling and grammar and those types of things, they're just perplex me. I just can't seem to get them. But this coach helped me. He said, let's just write. Let's just get it down, get the story on paper. We can clean it up later. And so for the next 2 years, I would just write on the train. I was commuting into downtown Seattle. I had 25 minutes. That was the other thing. Where do I find the time to write? And if you think about it, you do have little pockets of time every so often. So I had a commute where I was just reading every day. So every day, for 25 minutes in, I would write, and 25 minutes on the way home. That added up to almost an hour. It was roughly a page a day that I would write. And after about a year and a half, it turned into the first draft of a book. And so that's how it was created. And it was just consistently writing it. And questions other people ask, I didn't really know how the story was going to end. I just started at the beginning and worked my way through it to the end. And in fact, at one point I was kind of stalling and just writing, and because I was working with my coach, I said, I don't know how to end this book. I don't really know how this is going to work out. And so we just kind of slowly worked, and eventually I just kind of got the idea one day, and I said, I've got it figured out. I know how this book's going to end, and was able to finish it. And it was a lot of fun. So what I wanted to do, and I should have done before, is just read one section of the book that talks about when the President of the United States finds out about what's happened in Yellowstone. And so, again, one of the things that drives, and I'm going to talk maybe about my next book in a minute here, Lost Cause, things that keep me up at night. That's one of the things that drives me for writing my stories, is write about what really terrifies you. Well, I know for some it's horror, zombies, things like that. That doesn't really terrify me. Extinction events terrify me. Things that we have no control over, that we know have happened in the past. Meteor strikes, and we're in the news, plagues, and the Yellowstone volcano keeps me up at night because there's not a whole lot we can do about it once it were to start going. So this section of the book is about where the Secretary of the Interior is telling the President that we're seeing new volcanic activity in Yellowstone, and he's going to explain what we possibly can find. So let's see. Secretary Matson went on. Park Service scientists believe something unprecedented is happening in recent history is happening. As I stated, earthquake activity is up significantly. Geyser activity and intensity has increased. Yet here's what's most interesting. The Secretary handed the President a large satellite picture of Yellowstone Lake. We just talked about it. The blue lines ringing the lake represent the historic shorelines. And then here is the most recent lake shoreline. From all indications, the lake shore is moving to the south. One of the things I did in this book is I found research that talked about how the lake has actually changed, so it made it more ominous. These things that I put in here are in many instances are actually happening, or have happened in Yellowstone. That didn't strike the President as particularly strange. Water bodies and their shorelines move all the time. As the President knew, Lake Michigan's shoreline had moved several miles over the past 1,000 years. The Secretary could see that the President wasn't grasping the significance. He made it plainer. Sir, these two shorelines are only 2 weeks apart. 2 weeks? How can that be? Our best guess is the park's magma chamber is moving up, displacing the northern portion of the lake and pushing the water to the south. That actually happened about 3 or 4 years ago. A scientist went out, was testing and measuring the shoreline levels, and he put stakes in the southern end of the lake. And every week he'd come back, and his stakes would be further and further out in the lake. And he's like, somebody is moving my stakes. Well, eventually he GPSed them and realized they were not moving. The lake was actually moving. And just like I said, it was the northern end of the lake was going up, moving the lake water to the south. And what it indicates is that that magma was moving up in the park and displacing the water in the lake. So if I've got this right, Yellowstone is experiencing a swarm of earthquakes, this is the President again, increased geyser activity, and a massive lake is being lifted at one end. Correct. The President got to the point. Does the National Park Service and the United States Geologic Survey believe an eruption is imminent? No. However, the Secretary trailed off, and the President was getting angry. However, and here is why Matson ultimately decided to tell the President of the Yellowstone threat, Any unprecedented event, say a massive earthquake or a large meteor strike, could create crust fractures triggering an eruption. This is highly unlikely though. Okay, sum it up. What are we looking at, the president asked. Best case, if Yellowstone were to erupt today as it did 600,000 years ago, the secretary paused and referred to the Park Service report to make sure he got the next information right, an eruption that could last for weeks or months, burial of roughly a third of the United States in tens of feet of ash, buildings would be crushed, depending upon prevailing winds, total destruction of the Midwest food production, and climate change the likes of which the planet has not seen in hundreds of thousands of years. Millions of people would be killed outright or starve to death in the ensuing weeks after the eruption. In a nutshell, it would destroy the country. And that's the best case scenario, the president asked sarcastically? Okay, what's the worst? An eruption could destroy civilization as we know it. So that was the driver of this book, was basically getting people to think about, and one of the things I talk about later is that I also delve into the mindset of the terrorists and the people that want to have this happen. They are looking at, I tried to get into the mind of Al-Qaeda and say, it must be incredibly frustrating for them. They pull off all these spectacular terrorist attacks, but the United States seems to continually just go on. They took down our 2 world towers, but we continue to move on. And I wanted a plausible attack that was didn't take infinite resources, but could cause devastating damage that the United States would not survive from. And that's how I came up with the attack on Yellowstone. So that's what's in this book. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's so my dad was asking about the reference to the title. The book's called Unleashing Colter's Hell. And John Colter was a member of the Lewis and Clark expedition. And he went out with Lewis and Clark. And on the way back, he was your quintessential mountain man. He could not stomach the idea of returning to civilization. He'd been out west for 2.5 years and basically said, I don't want to go back to St. Louis. I've decided to leave the expedition. So he did, in basically Montana, and spent the next several years exploring southern Montana and northwestern Wyoming. And he was the first European American to stumble across the area of Yellowstone. Well, eventually he made his way back to the east and started telling tales about Yellowstone, this great place with geysers and hot springs and giant canyons and unbelievable wildlife. And nobody could believe it. They labeled it Colter's Hell. They said, this has got to be a joke. So he was getting really frustrated and upset about it. So he started to embellish the stories. He would tell things like, there are canyons so wide in Yellowstone that you could yell, wake up, go to bed, and then the echo would come back in the morning and wake you up. And so it turned into this fanciful kind of place that was Colter's Hell. But eventually he was proved right, that there is this unbelievable place in northwestern Montana. So what's next? What am I working on? I've got, just so happens my next book is out called Lost Cause. And one of the things as a park ranger, there's a couple things. You're expected to know everything as a park ranger. There's a game visitors play called Stump the Ranger, where they will ask you questions and try and get you to admit you don't know the answer. There's a couple things we do on there. Often, after about the 3rd week, you know the answer to every basic question people are going to ask. It's basically, where's the bathroom and where can I find someplace to eat? But there are some that do stump you on occasion. And what I would do if someone asked me randomly, what's the name of this flower? I'd say, okay, do we have any botanists in the group? No? No? Good. Okay, well, it's this. So that's what rangers, they're expected to know and do everything, but they also have to deal with a very wide range of visitors. And I can't tell you how many conspiracy theories I had to listen to when I worked in the National Park Service. That's what's driving this book. But before I get to that, at Yellowstone, hopefully I'm not going to offend anyone, but people would ask, where are the tunnels in Yellowstone? Someone had heard that there were UN tunnels in Yellowstone. They had a secret army that was underneath Yellowstone, and that they were waiting to come out. And so I just said, well, you know, I'm just a lowly GS5 ranger. You know, I'm seasonal. They don't pay me a whole lot. But there are billions of gallons of boiling hot water under this park. I seriously doubt there are any tunnels on here. And then they'd say, oh, you're one of them. So but basically you would find that Rangers would have to deal with these types of conspiracies all the time. And it was kind of actually fun to hear, what people actually thought. I talked to one guy who was convinced we never went to the moon. I had this whole big explanation of why that happened. Well, one of the things that's driving my next book, which is Lost Cause, and it's set in Civil War parks, is a conspiracy about the rise of the next Civil War. Will that happen? Will we ever see that again? And I wanted to just read real quickly from one of the aspects of this book, talk about what the Lost Cause actually is, and that was the driver for this book. So Grayson was a ranger in Yellowstone. He's now on detail. Park rangers get sent places all the time. They serve, kind of like in the military, you'll go to another detail, you'll serve there for a short period of time, then you'll go back to your normal duty station. Well, in this book, he's been sent to Gettysburg to just serve as a scholar and a historian there, and it's talking about the Lost Cause conspiracy. There's this belief that there's a relic that was owned by Robert E. Lee that, if found, could help start the Second Civil War. So we're in a scene here where Cole is working with the archivist from Gettysburg, and basically he wants to download on what this Lost Cause conspiracy is. So he's talking to her, he's like, tell us everything you know about the Lost Cause conspiracy. God almighty, Grayson, it's pure fantasy. Like all conspiracies, it starts with a shred of truth and spins into a full-blown plot. Thompson let out a long sigh. That's the archivist. Where should I begin? Thompson said, unsure of herself. I know a bit about the conspiracy, but why don't you start from the beginning, Cole reassured. Assume that we know nothing about the plot. For starters, what is the Lost Cause?